People who left someone at the altar. What made you do it and what was the fallout? My buddy was engaged to be married. Everything was going great up until about 2 months before the wedding, when the bride freaked out about something very minor during a family vacation and stopped speaking to him. They would text once a day so the other knew they were okay. They would say "I love you" and she would assure him she still wanted to get married. 1 month before the wedding she called it off. They still hadn't talked except for the texts. So he called all his people and told them the wedding was off. Only he forgot about one of his friends who had been on his fiance's list, as he was a mutual friend. Mutual friend still went to the wedding where he found a wedding. The woman had been seeing someone on the side. Still went through with a wedding but to a different guy. All on my friend's dime. He had left her in charge on cancelling everything. WOW. This can't be real. My wife was set to be a bridesmaid in this wedding of her college friend. It was an out-of-state wedding. And they had people coming in from all over the USA and Europe for this. Expensive sort of deal. Just my wife's dress was over $1,000 easy. 5 days before the wedding, the groom called the whole entire thing off. The reason? He was Church of Christ and she was a Baptist, and according to him, she was in the wrong church, and since she wouldn't join his church then he had to break it off. To the weeping bride's credit, her parents did pay back everyone, including my wife, the money for her bridesmaid dress. My mom called off a wedding to a man she was engaged to before she met my dad. It was only 1 week before. She said they got into an argument over something very trivial. Something having to do with cows, but it was enough of a wake-up call for her that they were not right for each other. I know this man and she was right not to marry him. There were people that did not get word the wedding was cancelled and showed up at the church. Edit. So I had to ask my mom what the deal with the cows was. I guess they passed by a pasture and my mom commented on how lovely the sound of cowbells are, and he basically told her she was dumb for caring. Dart. You can always tell the character of a man by his opinions on cows. Not quite at the altar, but an ex-girlfriend was at a bachelorette party at a seedy male strip club. She came home from the party and said, "Well, the wedding is off." She said the bride was getting the usual treatment. Sitting in a chair with strippers gyrating around her, whipping dongs around. And then one put whipped cream on his big dig and invited her to lick it off. Which she did. With her tonsils. Until the stripper shoots his load all over the front of her "I'm the bride" t-shirt. About this moment, the bride kind of comes to her senses. Looks around and sees like 20 of her friends pointing cell phones at her, recording and taking photos, and starts freaking out. My girlfriend says she started screaming at everyone, "You better delete that sheet," and generally having a full rage meltdown. Which is apparently tough to take seriously when you're based in strippages. This tale of modern romance closes very shortly later with the bride's phone ringing a call from her fiance, who has already received photos from her friends of his bride-to-be with a big dig stuffed in her mouth. As someone who was left at the altar, that sucked gonads. I was dating this girl for 5 years. I popped the question and she happily agreed. 10 months in and the day had come. Everything was fine until that question from the padre. I didn't notice at first, but someone walked as a guest to watch. And she literally changed her tone. Her demeanor instantly changed. So when the padre asked the question, she said aloud no. And she walked away with someone. As it turns out, she was cheating on me with some dude for 1 year. Apparently that dude knew about our wedding and walked in to scoop her out. I was left with severe anger. Not even a shred of sadness. Just extremely pissed. I screamed at her family and mine sticked foe the church and let me be. Soon after, the sadness came in. But I got over here surprisingly quick. Took me 4 months. Which was good because I found out the dude was using her hard-earned savings for his meth addiction. Last thing I heard from her, she is living in a homeless shelter. Thank God I had no kids with that biatch. I'm happily married to someone else now with kids. Why even let it get that far if you're just going to say no and go with somebody else? I'd be pissed too. Not entirely on message, but we almost called off our wedding the day before. Her dad had a massive heart attack and almost died 2 days beforehand. He had surgery. Died 2 or 3 times during it. We got like 7 hours of sleep over 2 nights. 3 days. He was in the ICU up until the ceremony. He then showed up and walked her down the aisle. With an automatic defibrillator vest. Then sat in a wheelchair, thank God. My emotions were all over the place. I don't know how she kept it together, lol. We almost had to call my wedding off because my dad was in the hospital. Suffering from a bad liver. It was a very scary time. My dad was released a few days before the ceremony and was able to walk me down the aisle. I am forever grateful that he was there for me on my special day. Like he was for everything important to me in my life. Unfortunately, I lost him in February of this year. As someone who married someone who should have left me standing at the altar instead of dragging a lie on for another 10 years with all the nasty consequences, I applaud you for doing right thing before the ring. Sorry to hear that. Hopefully you're out of that relationship now. I just found out my mom called off her wedding. Pretty late in the process. This was in the 1960s and the formal wedding announcement with photos had already been posted in the newspaper. Because that's a thing that people used to do. IG. She and her fiancé, who I'll call Steve, had met in college. Gotten pregnant. And gave the baby up for adoption. They then continued to date for another 3 years. Got engaged when my mom was 21. And called off the wedding a month before the ceremony. Turns out that giving a baby up in college is a really bonding experience and all your friends will be like, OMG, I can't believe you guys survived that together. You're such a great couple. You're such role models. etc when in actuality you're in friggin' college and are just figuring out who you are as people. And maybe that means that you're not meant to be together. She says that everyone just assumed they would get married. So they were going to, because where else do they go from? The adoption. Luckily they realized they were just going along with the motions in time. My mom says it was no hard feelings between her and Steve. That they meet up every 3-5 years just to see what's up with the other. And she has no regrets. Unlike her actual marriage to my father. But hey, she got me out of that deal, so it wasn't all bad. Meanwhile, I just found out, met my 54-year-old sibling for the first time that I hadn't known about. My mom's not sick. But she is getting older. And I guess she felt she needed to get this off her chest and tell me before it was too late. Turns out my secret sister is a ducking CrossFit trainer with arms like cannons, so I have no genetic excuse for not being able to do a pull-up. Also, my mom is cool as shit and I think this whole story makes her even cooler. Not quite at the altar. But a few weeks before the wedding I left my fiance. We had been together 4 years and the proposal was really half-assed. Like he was asking because we had been together so long and it seemed the next thing to do. Not because he actually was excited about marrying me. I had been unhappy with him for a long time, but his emotional abuse had convinced me that this was the best relationship I was ever going to find, so I stayed. My mom came to visit a month before the wedding and saw how miserable I was. She said, "You don't have to marry him if it won't make you happy." It was such a simple thing to say. But it was like someone finally gave me permission to consider my own feelings for the first time in years, and it changed my whole perspective. I called it off. Moved out. Got some agency over my own life. And am now living happily ever after. Edit. I realized I forgot to include the fallout OP asked for. Lost money on deposits. Managed to sell the dress for half of what I paid. Left all the high ticket items I had purchased during the relationship behind to avoid staying any longer to fight with him. I'd pay it all 10 times over to again feel the immediate relief I felt when I left our house for the last time. And I'd pay it 1,000 times over to keep the life I have now without him. Leading up to our wedding, my wife and I started having more stress as is normal. Things weren't going well with her mother, who would complain about not being included and then not show up or show up late when we tried to include her in planning activities. When my wife's dress came in, she had to go to get it fitted. And at the same time we had to go take care of something with the florist. So we had asked my future mother-in-law to take care of the florist while I took my wife to the dress shop. We arrived at the dress shop and everything was going well. But then my mother-in-law backed out at the last minute. So I had to go take care of the florist. I guess that meant that I left my wife at the altar. I didn't leave her at the altar. I was the one that was left. It happened not the day of the wedding but just a couple days before it, when literally guests from all over the country had already arrived and the last of the $40,000 had been spent on everything wedding related. It was the devastatingly worst day of my life. She didn't even tell me in person. She called me and told me while I was at work that we were not getting married. I was a complete mess. Called my brother to ask him if he would notify everyone. I drove straight to my parents' house and locked myself in the guest room for a week. Never knew so much liquid could come out of someone's face for such a long period of time, lol. It's been a journey but I'm better off for it today. It definitely still hurts but at least there is some light in my life now. There is a bit of a backstory but basically she deeply betrayed my trust about a year before the wedding and from that day forward my confidence fell and it was apparent I didn't feel like an equal in the relationship. So, she essentially didn't feel as doted upon or loved as she once was. Which is true. Anyway. Yay, the saying is true. When you hit rock bottom, the only way out is up. $40,000? Holy shit. I know weddings can get expensive, but that is a lot more expensive than I would imagine. Well, I'd already taken the communion so I figured I'd go sit down. But the priest had to stay up there and feed a few more people. As far as I can be from the target group. But this month I was supposed to get married. Got a suit, rings, papers. I was dating this woman for 2 years, long distance relationship. I went there several times. All was going well. She even picked up this month because some astrology BS. So I went to her country for 3 months. Longest I've been. The whole time she was acting like a stranger. I felt like I was some burden to her. She was increasingly careless about me, with ever increasing demands. We didn't even got close to the altar. Actually I was spending most of my time by myself, in a foreign country with no friends. Yet I tried to make things work. But effort needs effort from both sides. Not just effort from one side and increasing demands from the other. One of my friend's sisters. It was a few years back. It was an arranged Indian wedding and the lady was initially very accepting and happy with the groom. They talked and fell in love with each other leading to the marriage. She was really looking forward to the wedding because she was very much involved in her wedding planning and preparation. So about 1 month before her wedding the lady met her high school crush and started to bond with him. Then she fell in love with the high school him. Well, she eloped with the guy just hours before the wedding. Her parents disowned her. She hurt a lot of people doing that. See, usually I would say something about arranged marriages being not having a great success rate. But you said they fell in love beforehand. Which makes her actions ducking terrible. That poor groom thought he had gotten lucky and been arranged to marry someone who actually loved him. Only to be dumped for a high school crush. Do you know if she is still with her crush or did that fall apart? Please say yes. I typed out this whole story pretending to be Emily from Friends and then I realized she didn't leave Ross at the altar. My shame is great. My ex-fiance couldn't spell altar. I took pictures. Photographer. Once I finished the stage pictures at the front of the church, the groom handed me a check and I left. No fallout. I think they left me a decent review on Yelp. There she was lying on the altar. Around me the other acolytes were chanting blood. 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 But I just couldn't do it. She was such a good dog. I didn't think it was right to sacrifice her to the blood gods. Now, My neighbor that lets her dog shit in my yard? Let's just say my eyes glowed red with the power absorbed from her body for 2 whole days. My name is Rachel. I was gonna marry a dude because my dad wanted me to. I didn't want to marry Barry. So I went into the bathroom and opened the window. I left and eventually found my old best friend. I even got a boyfriend that I actually love. I knew a lady who got married to a man she met at a bar and had known for less than an hour when he proposed and she accepted. They had a party wedding at a park and got the marriage annulled within about 48 hours. She said she didn't like the way the guy bought produce. He was too choosy. He should have been more choosy with the tomatoes if you ask me. Went to a wedding where the priest and the groom came out from sanctuary. Then the bride, dressed in regular dress clothes, and her father came out. There was mumbling. The priest made the announcement. There would be no wedding that day. But there would be a prayer said for the couple and their family and friends. A short reception, 1 hour long at a restaurant on the same block, was held with parents of the couple welcoming the guests. Each had been too scared to cancel. Bride and groom each married others and are still with those spouses. Most civilized and best ending to a rough day. My husband and I eloped too. But we almost called it off because his cousin, who wasn't invited, decided he wanted to see us get married. My mother-in-law called to tell us this and we were pissed. We told her he is not invited. And we didn't want him there or his creepy GF. They ended up going to the beach instead and came to hang out with us later. Still pissed us off that he just thought he could just show up for our wedding without an invite. Spoiled duck. I called off an engagement months before the wedding because the bride-to-be was too scared of sex to want it. I couldn't live my life like that. My whole extended family got cancellation notices. They had never even gotten the invitation in the first place. Then 6 months later she tried to get back together and I turned her down. She immediately came back with her OHH. Well, I've met someone new and we have expressed deep feelings for each other. So goodbye. I felt sorry for the new guy. She was looking to offload him in favor of me, so how deep did these feelings actually go? I often wondered if I should have gave him a heads up about what just about happened to their relationship. I was a guest on the bride's side. An acquaintance from a previous job that was kind enough to invite me. Everything was going well. She started walking down the aisle then stopped halfway. Her father and mother came over. She whispered to them, then they all turned around and walked away. The groom immediately followed. Music kept playing then slowly drifted away. We all just sat there in dead silence. A couple of minutes later the father of the bride came back down the aisle and apologized, but there was going to be no wedding today. We all just got up and slowly left. There were a couple of angry family members on the groom's side, but once they talked to the father of the bride they immediately just left. At the door the mother of the bride shook my hand and thanked us for coming. Told us that they would explain everything later, but for now we should just head home. The story is that the groom the night before ceremony confessed to the bride that he was gay. He loved her. He still wanted to marry her, provide and raise children. But he needed her to know she couldn't let him live like that, and it wasn't fair to either of them.